Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition, a great opportunity for you to spend a little bit of time listening to some of the things that we feel are very important. This has been a week in which lots has taken place. In studio with me today, Debbie Georgatos, as well as Kassie Dulin. And Debbie, thank you for joining us, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
And Kassie, I might just say this first time I've met you, but you've been on the program before, and you actually serve as the Director of Legal Communications at Liberty Institute.
I do. It's been a great experience.
I'm going to start with one of the stories that comes out of Plano right now. And one of the things that's so interesting is, Deborah, remember a while back when we had the conversation in Houston, and where there was a decision by the Houston mayor and the secretary down there to invalidate all of those petitions, interestingly enough. And we've got a story that's just about like that right now.
Sure do. I have Kassie tell about it. It's amazing. Yep.
Kassie, you're on. Tell us what just happened, because I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with what has been happening in Plano, and it is very similar, and that is that you had one of those sexual orientation issues, and at that time it was decided to actually bring together a petition so that it would be on the ballot. And tell us what you found out just this morning.
Sure. Well, just like you were saying, 8,000 of Plano citizens came together and said, we're concerned about this ordinance because of how it threatens religious liberty and freedom of speech. So they submitted the petition, and this morning we just found out that the city came back and said that they're completely invalidating the petition. They will not accept one signature on it. They're saying the entire petition is invalid due to some pretty small technicalities.
Interesting. Now, in Houston, they invalidated the signatures. This time they invalidated the whole petition. But Debbie, I know you're just hearing about this just a few minutes ago, but I've just got to be amazed that in light of what's been happening in Houston, now here we have another story right here in Plano, Texas.
It is surprising that Texas at all is the center of this kind of pushing. And I would say, I think two things it suggests. One is the left's determination to push the leftist social agenda of same-sex marriage, just eviscerating of all kind of American cultural norms about our behavior and marriage and life. It is relentless. And it does also call out, a lot of people say, I vote in national elections, I maybe vote for governor, I don't really pay attention to local elections, but this is a consequence of not paying attention, because plenty of people in Plano were trying to raise awareness about this kind of issue during the last election cycle. You need to watch, even locally, big things can change in your life.
I think a lot of people are going to pay attention to everything from president to dog catcher now, because we recognize that whatever position an individual might have, he or she could exercise a very significant amount of power. And I would be the first to say that, first of all, I was one of those people that lived in Plano and signed that petition. So just a disclaimer about a possible conflict of interest, but I'm just offended that after all the work and all the time and all the effort to put that petition out there and then to get this on the vote so that there would be an opportunity for the citizens in this particular community to vote on it, that with just one kind of waving of the hand, it was invalidated.
It's another example of the kind of thing that's been talked about a great deal in the last 6 years, this idea about the rise of elitism or statism, which I know this is a local jurisdiction, so maybe statism sounds wrong, but it's the idea that once we're elected, or once people are elected, they think we're just a lot smarter than the people, and we don't have to listen to the people. That's what this Plano City Council is really saying, is we just don't care what the people think.
I remember William F. Buckley one time said, I would rather be ruled by the first 200 names in the Cambridge, Massachusetts phone book rather than by the professors of Harvard University.
Wise man.
Some of us that have gone to some of those kinds of schools, we recognize that although I think we survived some of those schools and had some common sense out of it, we also recognize some of the colleagues that were in law school with you or in graduate school with me that probably don't have a lot of common sense and do really indeed believe that they are smarter than the average voter out there. Kassie, let me come back to this for just a minute, because there is a nice piece that you wrote in the Dallas Morning News, an op-ed piece, and one of the arguments that you made, and we'll maybe come back to this a little bit later, is that this has been used already. These kinds of ordinances have been used to harm individuals. And today, for people that are listening online or would like to make a point of going to our viewpoint section, you will see Penna Dexter's commentary on the Oregon bakers. And that one is just a tragic story. We have another very tragic story out of this florist in Washington State. And, of course, we can go down this very long list of others, photography business in New Mexico, wedding chapels in New York and Idaho, and on and on and on. When people, again, wave their hand and say, oh, this isn't any big deal, nobody's going to be penalized, we have too much of an example and too many sad examples of how these ordinances have been used against Christians.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because the argument that people who are pushing this ordinance try to use is, oh, we just want tolerance and we want diversity and we want everyone to love each other. And that sounds wonderful, but the problem is you have to look at the results and say what has happened. And we're seeing people get hurt by these ordinances. The family who owns the bakery in Oregon, their sweet family, it was a woman's dream to own a bakery. She's being fined $150,000. Her bakery has been put out of business. Then you've got the grandma who's a florist in Washington State. And not only is she getting sued because she just declined to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, the attorney general is suing her personally, and she could lose her home over this. And it's just hard for me to see how they can hold up the argument that this is tolerant and loving.
It's tolerant only of one viewpoint, which is the people who are filing the lawsuits. There's also this commentary frequently going on in America about, is Christianity under assault? And that brings eye rolls from many in the left, many in the media. Just, oh, come on, no one's shutting down your churches. And so stop talking about this Christian or Christianity under assault. But the idea, if you can only just believe what you think on Sunday morning, but you can't live it, that's not really practicing your religion. That's just, protection of worship on Sunday morning someplace. But the idea, if you actually do have a religiously based opposition to same-sex marriage and you're forced to honor it, you are having your religion assaulted. It's amazing. This is occurring at the same time. We have so much talk in America about honoring Muslims, honoring Islam and its place in American history. It's amazing juxtaposition.
I would think so. We need to take a break, but again, if you would like some more information, one of the things that we like to do is provide you with some ammunition. And the commentary today by Penna Dexter, who is at a conference, and it's not around the round table, but I will commend you. It's going to be posted in just a second on our website, called Sweet Cakes, because that was the name of the bakery, Sweet Cakes Bakery, by Melissa Klein. And this is a wonderful individual who actually got involved in really knowing a little bit about each one of the customers and put a lot of her creativity into it, and then sometimes would follow up and find out how the wedding went. Just about the nicest person you could meet. And of course, Aaron and Melissa Klein were at the Family Research Council event this last year and got to meet them. But here now, fined $150,000. It's not bad enough that they closed down their bakery, but then fined of $150,000. And then, of course, you mentioned the other situation where Baronelle Stutzman, who was a Christian florist there in the state of Washington, the judges decided not just to close down the florist shop, but to basically put her house and everything on the chopping block and to actually not only drive her into bankruptcy, but to make her homeless. And so for people that want to say, this is really not a big issue, you're making more out of it than there really is, that's not the case. Well, we can talk more about that a little bit later, but we wanted to let you know about the story out of Plano. When we come back, we'll talk about Islam. The White House had a conference on terrorism. What about that? That coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
If two is company, then certainly three parents are a crowd. That is how some are describing the decision by the British House of Commons that voted to legalize the creation of a baby using the DNA of three parents. The controversial practice is being touted as a way to create children without certain genetic diseases. Remember what Dr. Frankenstein said before his fictional experiment? What could possibly go wrong? The scientific and ethical issues are significant, but that hasn't stopped one American researcher from requesting permission from the FDA to conduct trials on similar experiments. Dr. Pierre Sanders, a British opponent of the legislation, said, "These techniques are highly experimental, unproven, known to be unsafe, ineffective, costly, a waste of public money, insufficiently understood, and will require large numbers of efforts to proceed, even for just a few families." As I've mentioned, the procedure was initially promoted as a way to create perfect children by preventing disease-causing mutations in their mitochondria. The argument by the British researchers and the American researcher is that a three-parent conception will create in vitro babies that are free of mitochondrial diseases. However, one scientist also wants to use the three-parent technique for the treatment of infertility. I think we can begin to see where this leads. First, we're creating babies without mitochondrial disease. Then we're using the technique to treat infertility. Along the road, we begin to accept the idea of designer babies and even the creation of a super race. We have the technological ability to do some incredible things. Do we have the wisdom and moral foundation to make the right choices? Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do it. In the movie Jurassic Park, Ian Malcolm complains to the park's creator, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think whether they should." We don't need to rush into a world of three-parent embryos. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. David Georgatos and Kassie Dulin with us today. It is our round table, and this is an opportunity to look at all sorts of issues. In some respects, people paying attention to the program might say, it reminds me of Sesame Street. This program is sponsored by the letter I. ISIS, Islam, Israel, immigration, the internet, but we did cover a few others before that, and so we'll certainly help you to keep your attention in that regard. But Debbie, let me come to you for just a minute. The White House had a conference on terrorism a week ago. Of course, the president gave the National Prayer Breakfast, and there have been a lot of words spent over the last couple of weeks about how to think about this war on terror and whether or not we should call the ISIS, which are called Islamic State, Islamic. I always love that. Should we call the Islamic State Islamic? Okay. Those are the kinds of questions that a lot of people, from Charles Kruthammer to Victor Davis Hanson to even today Peggy Noonan, are raising. What are your thoughts?
I really appreciated so much of the writing that was out in the American public view this past week about this issue, because it's very hard. The American people want to trust the president. They want to trust the administration to tell them what's going on. And when you hear the president speaking of the problem that we are looking at with ISIS and attacks around the world by radical jihadists, by Muslims, and he can't call it that. He can't call it a global jihad or whatever word you like him to use. It does, unless you really tune in, it can make people feel confused. And then they wonder, well, maybe I'm just intolerant, not understanding. One of the best things I want to recommend to everyone listening is, and Peggy Noonan, her column makes reference to this, but in the Atlantic magazine, there was a very long, in-depth essay called what ISIS really wants. And you can find it online. You can just Google that. It's on the website.
Yeah, Penny
Right.
Dexter, when she was hosting the other day, put it on there, and I read it and was very impressed with that Atlantic article, and a lot of people think it should become a book.
Yeah, part of what they're getting at is we just fail to appreciate the depth of the determination by those who are committed to what they call the real Islam. It is the teachings in the Quran, and they turn to two particular writers of beyond the Quran, but they can't think of their names. Qatb is one guy's last name. But,
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we had him on talking about that with Michael Yosef, because he actually did his thesis. I think it was his doctoral thesis on Qub. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think that failing to identify the problem makes it worse for America. And, we did have this past week, President Obama holding his conference on extremism, barely mentioned Islam, Muslim, jihad, or any of those kind of things. And there was a countervailing or another conference held the previous week. And I think we mentioned it last week on the show, but was put on by the Center for Security Policy. And they called theirs the Defeat Jihad Summit. Now, there's a name that might help you understand the issue. But yeah, it's a alarming thing for people in America we watch the ISIS, the tapes, the videos we see online, we read the stories, and you love to get a sense. Is this a 100th, 1/1,000,000th of the Muslims in the world? But the real problem is we aren't sending a message from our country that we mean it. And that's one of the big messages that came out of the Defeat Jihad conference was we have to think about Islam the way we thought about communism during the Cold War. We have to fight not just their troops on the ground and their ground aggression. We have to fight them at every level, economic level. We have to disable them economically. We have to speak out in the war of ideas. We have to be talking about how there's a very stealth jihad going on within the United States in many ways. All of those are what should have been talked about at the president's conference.
Interesting. You mentioned that article, What ISIS Really Wants, and it is published in Atlantic, and you can find it on perhaps their website, but we have posted it there, and it was written by Graham Wood, in which he spent an enormous amount of time interviewing all sorts of individuals, some of whom have those names that are hard to pronounce, as you will know. And one of the people that he quotes from is probably the leading expert in the United States on ISIS, Bernard Hakel, who is at Princeton University. And I love Peggy Noonan, who points out something that hadn't really crossed my mind till I read it this morning. Okay, you have this White House conference on terrorism, and who is not on the list? Well, of course, we can talk about Frank Gaffney. He's been on this program with us before, and we can think of all sorts of individuals, but Graham Wood and the leading expert on ISIS theology, Bernard Hakel, is not there as well. These people that you can read aren't at the conference. Somewhere along the line, Kassie, I know when you put together conferences for Liberty Institute, you want to bring the people at the conference that can speak to the issues that are experts. And it seems to me that some of the experts never got invited.
Absolutely. Whenever you're doing a conference, it's helpful if you have the people who really know what's going on there. And I think it's just really sad that their statements were not able to be made and their viewpoints weren't heard on these important issues, especially when it is such a key issue of terrorism and an enemy targeting civilians and non-combatants in a really, really horrifying way. And I think it's so important that the theology behind that is explained by having the experts there.
One of the things we've got to begin to ask ourselves questions about is, have we seen this before? And both this Charles Kruthammer column as well as Victor Davis Hanson, it does seem to me, Debbie, that we've seen some of this before, and it does seem to me that that's something that maybe needs to be addressed as well.
If you're speaking of seeing some of this before, you mean comparing back to in communism and all that?
Yeah, and even the 1930s and things like that.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, this is such an interesting observation that was made by Victor Davis Hanson, and he talks about how in Europe, the 1930s, and really around the world, you saw after the world was war weary after World War I, and America became more isolationist, and there were more and more people. There was a growing anti-Semitism in Europe. There was tolerance of anti-Semitism, or almost acceptance of it. And he talks about, he runs through in his article all sorts of observations about the world's conduct in the 1930s and how we're paralleling it today. It was really alarming and upsetting. I do want to mention one other thing, though, that we ties into what the kind of things President Obama says, and they are that it isn't just that his conference didn't address the problems we need to talk about, but it sent signals to, for example, the prayer breakfast comments by President Obama last week, where he made the analogy that kind of ISIS is kind of similar to the history of Christianity and the Crusades, which I'll just say it is not, but we can leave that for another day. But part of what happened the very next week after President Obama compared on a national speech at the prayer breakfast, everybody heard, excuse me, what he compared was there was the Crusades with Islam. Well, there's a magazine, an Islamic State, ISIS magazine, English language, called Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q. And that's the name of the city is it Syria? It's Syria, that that is supposed to be the battlefield, the final, when the Muslims take over the world and establish the caliphate. But the entire magazine is dedicated to drawing the parallel between the Islamic State today and the Crusades. The enemy, the people who are beheading children, who are burying children alive, who are killing people, they hear President Obama's words at the prayer breakfast and dedicated most of the magazine to argument after argument about how what ISIS is doing today is just like the Crusades. So when our national leader speaks, people hear all over the world. It matters. And the other group that we didn't mention, we could talk about at some point too, is just Muslims who are confused. I mean, what is happening unless you're denouncing everything evil ISIS is doing, you're getting there's a battle in Islam between the traditional violent and the moderate nonviolent. And unless you denounce the violent and say what it is, you're kind of feeding confusion, and you're almost helping ISIS win their battle to let them be the ones that define Islam.
And you mentioned communism just a minute ago. I can remember, because we're a little bit older than, say, Kassie is. The war on communism was fought ideologically. You had Radio-Free Europe. It was fought economically, culturally. You were promoting democracy. A lot of people, when they say, well, we need to go after ISIS, think, well, you're talking about boots on the ground. Well, probably some. But even this article by Peggy Noonan and the article by Graham Wood point out all sorts of ways in which we can dismantle them without putting boots on the ground. And so a lot of that has to do with being wise. But you start by knowing how to define the enemy. And just before we take a break, one of the things that I think we can also do is support the nation of Israel. And last week, Debbie, you were with us. And one of the things that we still have on our Take Action section on Point of View, it says Stand with Israel, and this gives you an opportunity to contact your 2 senators and your representative. Now, I hate to admit it, but some of our listeners might not know they might know their senators, may not know their representative. The good news is, if you just push the Take Action button and put your address, if you know your address, it will tell you who your 2 senators and your representative are. It will list those. And then when you click on that button, it actually gives you a suggested message, because as we've pointed out before, we think that not only should we support the nation of Israel, but we should also make sure that your 2 senators and your representative, interestingly enough, are not going to boycott that March 3rd message. So here is an opportunity for you to take some action. So if you go to the website, pointofview.net, you'll see that middle button there that gives you an opportunity to take some action. And then you can go to the Viewpoint section, and you can find Penn and Dexter's commentary, my commentary, as well as one of the videos we've posted today. So there's some great resources for you available on the website, pointofview.net. We come back, though, we talked about anti-Semitism. We've got some stories about that. We'll talk about that, and most importantly, we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
America needs true friends in the Middle East, and for decades, Israel has been a solitary smile in a dust storm of scowls and terrorism. In early March, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is coming to America, but the president refuses to meet with him, and many members of Congress now say they won't attend his speech at the Capitol. Is this how we treat a friend? Is that what you expect from your leaders? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray button, Take Action. We've also got it in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Take action now at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Tell your representative and your 2 senators you expect them to attend the speech and to support Israel. Point of View Radio. One more way we're helping you stand for truth. Pointofview.net Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with me today, David Georgatos, as well as Kassie Dulin. And we will continue to focus just another minute or two on Islam. We'll take some phone calls. Then I want to get to this issue of anti-Semitism. What is happening overseas? also what we can do about it here in this country. But Debbie, just before we take some phone calls and get into that next topic, you've got some material from our good friend Frank Gaffney, and for people that are not familiar with him, he served as Undersecretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. He is an expert. We've, matter of fact, this week even quoted from the Center for Security Policy. But he's really helped us understand that when you talk about jihad, there are different elements to it. Help us understand what that might be.
I'd be happy to. The conference that Frank held, his organization is called Center for Security Policy in Washington, and the conference he held was called the Defeat Jihad Summit. And he goes through many practical suggestions, and he's drawing on what he learned in his time under Ronald Reagan when they were fighting communism, recognizing it as a multi-front fight. One thing he talked about just in terms of how we have to be vigilant in America is just about recognizing the ways there's been stealth jihad working its way into America, not a formal military battle, but through all sorts of things. He mentions, for example, economic war fighting. This is a 11-page summary called Secure Freedom Strategy. It's really good. One thing he talks about is making one major component a central economic financial war fighting. For example, constrict the principal sources of revenues for jihad. Talks about vast petrodollar transfers from Western nations to OPEC states that are wellsprings of support for Islamic expansionism. Attack those. He talks about treating Sharia adherents in the global financial markets and international trading system the same way we would treat terrorists, namely stigmatize them, call them out, embarrass them, point out we don't want them to be part of this is not how we can move forward in defeating radical jihad. He also talks about using cyber espionage, and he said the Islamists use highly sophisticated, potentially destructive cyber espionage and warfare, and we have to be capable of targeting it, and we have to spend the time and effort to do that. He also talks about, when we have so many city and council county governments and American state governments try to reach out and build a bridge to Muslims. He talks about Muslims who reject Sharias, and he uses the word seditious agenda. But let me just say a quick thing. Sharia means law. It means the imposition of Muslim law. And so when we have state and federal level government agencies trying to end the practice of engaging or outreaching, we should only engage in outreach with Muslims and to Muslims who reject Sharia, who reject the caliphate, who reject jihad. We need to establish our links and actually strengthen those people in those communities and tell them we're with you and we want to support you. He's got all sorts of economic things that are kind of hard to read on the air. But one big point that we talked about like a month ago or more had to do with this idea. The federal government, our country, the U.S., takes in refugees every year through an agreement we have with the United Nations. And we literally take in people this coming year. It's some extraordinary number coming here from Syria, treated as refugees. They don't come in through our immigration system.
Yes,
They circumvent it. He's saying get on top of those refugee settlement programs. Withdraw from them. Demand that we know who's coming. Refuse to bring people here who are Sharia adherent. Any Sharia adherent Muslims. And last big category he talks about are academic institutions. And then many academic institutions that accept funds from Sharia adherent individuals or governments, and they should be required to disclose it, explain themselves, kind of embarrass people taking money from any entity that supports Sharia or supports radical Islam.
And I think we should pay attention to that in this presidential campaign because we've seen some of that. And again, we've now learned how ISIS supports themselves, and it is through the trafficking of individuals. We now this week found out about they harvest organs and sell those on the black market and have killed doctors that would not harvest those organs and things of that nature. So, I mean, we are talking about more than just petrodollars and things of that nature. And so we really need to get our handle on that as well. Let me take a phone call or two, and then we'll get into our next topic because there are many more to put on the table. But we'll start out in the state of Texas. KCTA and John, thank you for calling today.
Hey, Kerby, thanks, you guys. You guys are great. I appreciate your positive message and your prayerful attitude. I didn't call about that, but I know back here in Corpus, now that you're mentioning what you're saying, we did find a jihadi woman was arrested here in Corpus, I believe, of pretty high standing in Al-Qaeda or something of that nature, but that's not why I called. The reason I called is about Barack Hussein Obama he's so caught up in his emotions right now, being a religious man himself. And, of course, we know he was with Jeremiah Wright for quite some time. I've often stated that if Barack Obama becomes president, he's he's a novice. He's not really tried and trained for what he was doing. And I think right now, because of the political situation and issues around the world, he's caught up emotionally in his true beliefs, and he's having a very difficult time trying to claim Christianity as something he really believes in, because you almost have to forsake probably 75 of his belief system. If you look at Jeremiah Wright, they don't totally believe completely that Jesus Christ is Lord of all.
Sure. Well, and as I've said before, if all I knew about Christianity was what I studied in an Indonesia madrasas and what I heard from the sermons of Jeremiah Wright, I'm not sure I'd be that favorable towards Christianity either.
You'd be confused.
Yeah, at the very least. And so that is the case. I'll pick up 2 points. Number one, you talk about novice. This is important. This is still your president. You still pray for your president. You pray for the office of the presidency. But at the same time, we're about ready to pick a new president. This time next year, do you realize that we will have already had primaries and caucuses? And so it's important to pay attention to whether or not these individuals on both sides of the aisle, on both tickets, are really prepared to lead us in what is going to have to be an ongoing struggle against radical Islam. If Barack Obama did not understand what he was getting himself into, he wasn't paying attention to George Bush. You could honestly say that George W. Bush didn't know he was going to have to fight a war on terror until 9/11, although he suspected we would certainly have to have an aggressive foreign policy. The next president, whoever he or she is going to have to address this in some very significant ways. And so this is an important issue. So, Kassie, your generation is going to, in some cases, people that are your age or younger are going to have a chance to vote for the presidency, sometimes for the first time.
Absolutely. And, I do think that issues of faith are so important to my generation, and especially in the area of religious liberty. And it was really discouraging to me with the National Prayer Breakfast so recently to hear the president who professes Christianity to come against the Crusades. And I thought the perfect response that I heard to that was something Governor Jindal said. And he said, the medieval Christian threat is under control, Mr. President, and so please deal with the radical Islamic threat today.
That is a good one. And actually, interestingly enough, in the Peggy Noonan column and some of the others, they talked about the kind of Islam is going back to a medieval philosophy. Mm-hmm. That you can have a debate in the academy all day long as to whether or not the Islamic State is Islamic. I think I've already given you a pretty good idea of what I think it is. But the bottom line is they believe that they are Islamic. They are taking literal interpretations of certain verses in the Quran, and they are convinced they are fighting a religious war. So the only real question is whether we'll acknowledge that that's the way they perceive it, right?
Yes, Governor Jindal, the comment that Kassie just read was really brilliant. He also had a speech in England, in London, not too long ago, where he said, he more or less spelled out, I understand this is the problem with Islam. He was very precise about it. And I just think every candidate should be asked directly and made to take a position on you. Do you understand the need in America not only to vigorously defend and crush ISIS abroad, and you understand at home the need to find people who are here, to find the terrorists who are here, and I guess the biggest thing is to boldly lead, to speak out and say, this is a major problem. And here in America, I would love if every candidate would say, we're not going to have Sharia, we're not going to have jihad, we're not going to have caliphate, and if that's what you want, you have to leave. You can't live here in America because we don't do that here. I'd love to have that tone.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls, and then we'll also get into this idea of anti-Semitism. But I might point you to one other article we've posted. That is the argument made by the president that Islam has been woven into the fabric of our country since its founding. Well, that would surprise, I think, the founders of this country and the framers of America. You have, of course, the speech he gave in Cairo where he said Islam has always been a part of American story. You have his statement in 2010 in which he said Islam has always been a part of America. But then in Wednesday, when he was involved in, of course, the White House conference on terrorism, he said, we welcome all people of faith. But then he went on to say, here in America, Islam has been woven into the fabric of our country since its founding. Then some applause. And he says, generations of Muslim immigrants came here and went to work as farmers and merchants and factory workers and helped to lay railroads and to build up America. and, tried to make the case. But if you think about it, didn't see a lot of Muslims at the Constitutional Convention and didn't see them in any kind of part of our life. We welcome them now, but again, if you want to read that piece, I think it begins to try to clarify some of the history that was blurred, I think, by the president this week at the White House conference. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Valentine's Day brings thoughts of love and marriage and sweet things to eat. This Valentine's Day, a business that is all about those things got some very bad news. Aaron and Melissa Klein own Sweet Cakes Bakery. Well, at least they had a bakery. It was located on the edge of downtown Gresham, Oregon. They specialize in wedding cakes. Well, at least they did until the gay marriage Gestapo came after them. The backstory is that Melissa Klein bakes absolutely stunning cakes. She's still baking to order out of the couple's home, where their 5 young children also reside. She loved baking wedding cakes, though. She'd get to know each couple and would use her God-given creativity to fashion a cake that, according to Melissa, reflected them as a couple. She tells people if the couple chose her to provide their cake, I would just feel so honored to be able to be a part of such an amazing, special day. The Kleins are godly Christians who consider themselves called to make this unique contribution to celebrations of the God-ordained institution of marriage. The Kleins' problems began when 2 lesbians came into Sweet Cakes Bakery to order a wedding cake. At the time, same-sex marriage wasn't even legal in Oregon. Having ordered other cakes at the bakery, these young women were satisfied customers. This time, though, the Kleins declined the business, saying baking a cake for a same-sex wedding would violate their religious conviction that marriage is solely the union between one man and one woman. 7 months later, and surely they had found a cake vendor by then, the lesbian couple complained to the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. About a year ago, the Bureau brought charges against the Kleins for violating an Oregon civil rights law that includes sexual orientation as a protected category. This month, the couple was informed that they are guilty of violating that ordinance. Their penalty will be monetary. In March, they'll find out how much, but authorities predict at least $150,000, which the Kleins say will bankrupt them. It's been 2 years since the lesbian couple first walked into Sweet Cakes by Melissa. The women are still upset by the statement Aaron Klein made in defense of his own freedom in this matter. He said, I'm free to exercise my religion however I see fit. If I'm told to make a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage, I feel that I'm violating my beliefs. I don't think I should have to do that. At the March hearing, the lesbians will be awarded damages for that. Sweet Cakes Bakery is now closed. Gay activists threatened to launch boycotts against any wedding vendor that did business with the Kleins, so the referral network went away. That was the death blow to their retail shop. Under these new civil rights laws, there's one group that's not protected: Christians. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you're on the line, just hold. We'll get to you in just a minute. Spent a little bit of time talking about marriage. We're going to come back to that later because you have the first same-sex marriage license in the state of Texas this week and some other decisions. We have not yet even been able to get to the issue of immigration, and a judge in the state of Texas actually put an injunction there. We might get to the internet and net neutrality. We have a lot of eyes, but we're still on the one on Islam and ISIS. But I thought one other issue that is related to that, and Debbie, I'll come to you first, and then I know Kassie has some material, anti-Semitism. And when we had Joel Rosenberg on this program, we were talking about the fact that there are more Jews who have come from France this last year to Israel than any other country. I think Ukraine is second. But he said that's just a fraction. You look at the number that have applied. If you look at what is happening in France right now, it's becoming one of the most anti-Semitic European countries. And you saw and pointed me to a video which I think helped illustrate that.
Sure did. You can find this online at the Federalist Papers website. But this reporter, he actually is a reporter, and he's in Paris. He dressed up to look Jewish, and he put on, I use the word yarmulke, and he has some other words in here. I don't know the name of they're probably Hebrew words, but he looked, obviously, as you looked at him, you would assume he was Jewish. And he did a thing where he had his camera person walking ahead of him with a backpack on, the camera sticking out. So everything that's happening to him is being recorded, but no one can see that. So he just walked around some of the streets in Paris. And part of what was happening to him, and he actually posted the video online, you can see, but he actually gets spit at. People yell things to him that are crass and anti-Semitic. And it wasn't just a little tiny...
And they look like they're going to come after him, too, you know. He showed more self-control, but I was just thinking probably a good thing, because if he even turned around to one of them, you could see what was going to happen next.
Yeah, and this was not someone trying to engage people, trying to taunt anyone.
Just walking down the street with a yarmulke on.
Yeah, he was actually interviewed on a Sean Hannity show, this very reporter. Did you see that, Sean Hannity? And he just said to him, Sean Hannity said, well, you know, you had... did you go some of those no-go zones, or maybe those don't really exist because all these people try to deny that no-go zones exist? And this guy said, oh, yes, this reporter, he said, they exist. And I did go in them. And yeah, you really felt frightened in those areas. So he was just intimidated and harassed during his entire walk simply for looking Jewish.
That is amazing. Kassie, I want to come to you because some people say, well, what can we do in this country? And Liberty Institute's been on the forefront of defending a Jewish congregation. And some people think, well, Liberty Institute, they only defend Christians. That is not true at all. And I want to talk about one of the success stories. So tell us about that.
Absolutely. And we were so honored to get to defend this congregation because we believe that religious liberty is our first right. It's the first right in the Constitution that's guaranteed. And it was really being threatened with this congregation because what was amazing to me is it's here in Dallas. I think sometimes it's easy to think that anti-religious bigotry is something that happens in Europe, but this was here in our backyard. Of where the studios are. And the story was that there was a very small Jewish community that lived in North Dallas, and they're Orthodox Jews. And so according to their faith, they can't ride in a car on the Sabbath. So if they want to meet for worship and to study and pray together, their meeting place has to be within walking distance. So they found there's a home that they meet in North Dallas and within walking distance. And a neighbor, when he realized what they were doing, that these Orthodox Jews were meeting in the home, he got so upset about it that he decided to sue them.
Wow.
Not only that, got himself elected as president of the Homeowners Association and dragged the HOA into the suit against them as well. And fortunately, we took it to court. Liberty Institute was very honored to defend them, and we received summary judgment in favor. They tossed out the suits by against the congregation, and fortunately, the congregation will be able to continue to worship privately. But it was just amazing to me when I heard about what was happening, and especially the arguments that were made about why they were bringing the suit. For example, that they were frustrated because they had to wait for a blind man to cross the street to get to the home, or a mom in pushing a stroller with babies. And I sat with the rabbi and talked to him, and he said it's put so much fear in the members. Yes. Even though we had a victory in the court, they said it's still been so stressful and so discouraging to see what we've been facing because of our faith.
I might just mention, if you go to our website, pointofview.net, and click on the picture where Kassie is, it says visit the website. That will take you to Liberty Institute, and you can go into the news section and find out not only that victory, but many of the other victories. And again, we certainly appreciate the good work that you and Kelly Shackelford and the whole team do. And again, an illustration of the fact that we have to stand for the religious liberty of everyone, not just for people that we agree with theologically.
I just have a quick question for Kassie, because I read vaguely about this, but I haven't followed it. Was the basis of the lawsuit that there was like a zoning problem, that it wasn't zoned to be a church?
Exactly. Right? They were saying there were actually signs in the neighborhood that said keep our neighborhood residential. But the ironic part was it is a residential home. The rabbi's son lives in the home, and they just come into the bottom part to meet a few times a week. So.
I was going to say, this is an example of when you are determined to fight someone, or you're driven by anger and hatred, which clearly this guy was driven by anti-Semitism. You can latch on to very normal and logical sounding grounds for lawsuits, grounds for criticism. And I assumed it had to be a zoning thing, but I think that happens. The American, or that happens around America in many groups where they choose something, an innocent sounding protection, and use it to try to facilitate a very evil motive.
Mm-hmm.
I did a commentary a while back on just all the cases I could find in which the zoning was used against churches.
Yes.
And I've said before, and Kelly agrees with me, and I'm sure Cassie would agree as well, that in the future, I think we'll occasionally have these big cases, the cross cases or the school prayer cases, and a valedictorian giving a prayer, something like that. But most of these cases are going to be these zoning cases where they have to get a special use permit, or where they're permitted to expand the church, or they can't have a Christian school, or they can't have a home Bible study. And Cassie, I think we're going to see more and more of those, and that's why we need to defend them and really support groups like Liberty Institute.
Absolutely. We're actually dealing with another case right now in Auburn, New York. And they invited a glee club to come onto the property, host a glee club for the kids as an outreach to the community. So bringing kids in to teach them to sing and dance. The city sued them over that, saying that it was because they accepted a registration fee for the camp, which the church lost money on it. But they're saying because you charged a very small registration fee to cover the cost, you're now engaging in a commercial enterprise. Oh, you violated zoning laws, so we're going to sue you. And it's just amazing. It's coming against people of all faiths. And it's really what's very concerning is it's the government. It was the city suing the church. And to me, that is such a clear violation of the First Amendment that it's hard to frame it any other way.
Makes you think about the story at the top of the whole show we talked about in Plano. And you think the government's above things, but the government is just people. Mm-hmm. It's just people you elect and people who can have very bad motives. I mean, wonderful people serve in government at every level, but there can be people badly motivated, badly educated, just with very skewed and wrong views that get power because they're in government.
I say to pastors all the time, you think, oh, I'm just going to preach the gospel. We're not going to worry about politics. And I said, yeah, and what will happen is the first time the city council tells you that you can't expand your parking lot, first time that it tells you that Christian school you have to go every single year to get a special use permit, all of a sudden you're going to be a lot more interested in political issues than you were before. So I think you need to pay attention. We've been talking about anti-Semitism, and one of the things that we've been encouraging people to do is to support Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's one of the things that certainly I know, Debbie, you've been real concerned about, that we have individuals in Congress that said, I think we'll just boycott this particular message by the Prime Minister of Israel.
Right. I know we're coming up on a break, but his Netanyahu's speech in Congress is to be on March 3rd. And partly what he's going to be talking about is encouraging America to stand up against Iran and hold on to the sanctions. And so there are literally dozens of members of Congress who privately said they're not going to attend. And I don't know, you have a petition to urge your own congressmen and senators to go. What Congress is doing is what the president and the executive branch should be doing, standing with Israel. And I think that's the main reason he got invited here.
Again, go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find the Take Action section. And those of you that are online, stay with us. We'll take your phone calls as soon as we finish the top of the hour break. And we hope that you'll take the time to visit the website, find some very important articles we've posted, and also hit that Take Action button. We'll have more right after this.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos, as well as Kassie Dulin with us. And this hour, after we take a few phone calls, probably get into the issue of immigration. The reason for that is a federal judge by the name of Andrew Hannon actually ruled that the Department of Homeland Security was really acting without constitutional authority, did not have the discretion by law to give 4.3 million aliens of the kind of protection. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll get back to the issue of marriage, because I want to get some more comments from both Debbie and Kassie about that. First same-sex marriage license and first same-sex marriage in the state of Texas. And of course, what's been happening in Alabama, we've been paying attention to, and some real important questions there. But let's take some phone calls, some of them left over from the previous hours. We talked about Islam. First one is Susan in Georgia, listening on WGNN. Susan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and I absolutely love the show. My statement is this. I was sitting at the computer a little while ago and was reading something that someone put on there stating, what the Quran had said about beheading unbelievers. And that I was thinking and started praying, and God had led me to Deuteronomy 32. And if I can take the liberty, I would just like to read something short here, if that would be fine.
Sure.
I'll make it short. It says, "For their rock is not as our rock." And it goes on to say, it says that their vine is the vine of Sodom and the fields as of Gomorrah. The grapes are grapes of gall, and the clusters are bitter. And their wine is the poison of dragons and cruel venom of asp. And he says, "Is this not laid up in store with me? And I've sealed this among my treasures." He says, "To me belongs vengeance and recompense. Their fruit shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste." And then he goes on to say that, "Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people." And it just, just hearing what God was speaking about this and about his enemies, because truly, they're not just the enemies of us, but they're his first and foremost because of who we stand for.
Sure. Let me put that in context a little bit, because earlier in Deuteronomy 28, you might know, and other passages talk about, again, and of course we go all the way back to Genesis 12, talks about the fact that if we bless the nation of Israel, we bless the people, then we will be blessed. If we curse, they curse. But of course also the warning in Deuteronomy is if they turn away. But then he goes and moves from the fact, and really even the prophecy, if you will, that there will be a time in which the Jewish nation will be dispersed, known as the diaspora. But now they've gathered again in Israel. And so, of course, this was written long before Islam came into being, but it is talking about other enemies. And if you want to begin to think about who are the enemies to the nation of Israel, and I know, Debbie, your husband works over there and works with people over there, they are surrounded by enemies. And even though there are some that are Shiite and some are Sunni and some are moderate and many are radical, they have one thing in common, and that is Islam. And it's a concern, and it's one of the reasons why we're encouraging people to support Benjamin Netanyahu in his speech on March 3rd.
Amen.
We sure are. And, that speech on March 3rd is directly currently is said to be about Iran, and how we in America are not standing strong against Iran and trying to prevent their development of nuclear weapons. And there's some speculation they already have them, but they're close to it. And this idea that is the number one hegemonic threat over there. If Iran decides that they are going, that is the biggest concern they have. I want to mention about Israel real quickly too. I read something that said Netanyahu has actually announced they're trying to find funding in Israel to bring as many French Jews to Israel as they possibly can. They know that they're in danger, and they want to offer them a place to come and live. And yes, my husband does travel there a lot, and you've been there, Kerby, and Ken has been there. And anyway, it's a very Western, democratically run society that has Muslims who vote. There are Muslim members of their Congress, which is called the Knesset. They're more like a Western culture, and they're surrounded by enemies, all of whom would like to destroy them.
Well, again, Kassie, I would like for people that are just listening, we talked in the first hour about how Liberty Institute has defended a Jewish congregation, and I suspect that some of that anti-Semitism we've seen in Europe is starting to show up here in America. So it's going to be, I think, even more important to support groups like Liberty Institute. Of course, we had a number of other people in the last couple of weeks. We've had Matt Staver on and many others that have all talked about the need to really defend religious liberty. And it doesn't matter whether they're Jew, Christian, Muslim, whatever. We are especially right now seeing that there is not only a hostility sometimes to Christian values, there's an incredible hostility to Jewish individuals, and we need to support them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to me to think that there are people over in Europe who are being prosecuted because of their faith, and that they're having to flee countries because they feel so unwelcome and so threatened. But I think the danger is that did not happen overnight. I think it's a problem when people of faith are not respected and religious liberty is not defended. And what concerns me is we really are seeing that here in America. We do a survey called the Undeniable Survey that documents cases of hostility toward religion in America. And every year, the book grows and grows and grows in thickness. We've documented thousands of cases of hostility toward religious liberty. And the concern is if people don't wake up and realize that and start taking a stand for their faith, I think it's just so easy for it to creep in and for people to not realize it. And one way it is through these ordinances and through executive orders. And it's things that are done kind of subtly. But the danger is if we don't realize it and stand, we could be headed toward a situation where people of faith are really feeling even more not welcome in America.
One name I didn't mention just a minute ago, Jay Sekulow. He's on the program, wrote an excellent book, by the way, one I commend to everybody, The Rise of ISIS, perhaps one of the best books out on ISIS from a Christian point of view, but at the same time has been defending religious liberty through the American Center for Law and Justice. So, again, these are organizations we believe in, whether it's Alliance Defending Freedom, whether it's Liberty Counsel, whether it's Liberty Institute, whether it's American Center for Law and Justice. We believe in all of those organizations. I think you should support all of them. If you can't, support at least one of them, because we really need to stand for this issue of religious liberty. Let's take one more phone call before we take a break here. We'll go to Florida. Billy, I think you have a testimony. I want to sit back and listen.
Yeah, I got a testimony. I want to comment about America's godly heritage.
Okay. I'm having trouble getting... do you want to share something with us?
I want you to comment. I'm going to touch on 3 topics, and I'd like you to comment on it.
Okay, just waiting for your answer.
The Black Holocaust here in America, the atrocities that were committed by Hoover, the FBI, and the federal government against Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam.
Getting kind of slow.
The molestation of young boys by Christian bishops, preachers, cardinals, whatever they call them, and also the racism Barack Obama must have experienced growing up here in America and having a white mother and a black father.
Interesting. On the computer here, it says Christianity has been good for me, and I came from America. But again, lie to get on the program. That's kind of where we get started. I'll respond to some of that before we take a break, but we need to take one of those breaks, so we'll come back and respond right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
If two is company, then certainly three parents are a crowd. That is how some are describing the decision by the British House of Commons that voted to legalize the creation of a baby using the DNA of three parents. The controversial practice is being touted as a way to create children without certain genetic diseases. Remember what Dr. Frankenstein said before his fictional experiment? What could possibly go wrong? The scientific and ethical issues are significant, but that hasn't stopped one American researcher from requesting permission from the FDA to conduct trials on similar experiments. Dr. Pierre Sanders, a British opponent of the legislation, said, "These techniques are highly experimental, unproven, known to be unsafe, ineffective, costly, a waste of public money, insufficiently understood, and will require large numbers of efforts to proceed, even for just a few families." As I've mentioned, the procedure was initially promoted as a way to create perfect children by preventing disease-causing mutations in their mitochondria. The argument by the British researchers and the American researcher is that a three-parent conception will create in vitro babies that are free of mitochondrial diseases. However, one scientist also wants to use the three-parent technique for the treatment of infertility. I think we can begin to see where this leads. First, we're creating babies without mitochondrial disease. Then we're using the technique to treat infertility. Along the road, we begin to accept the idea of designer babies and even the creation of a super race. We have the technological ability to do some incredible things. Do we have the wisdom and moral foundation to make the right choices? Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do it. In the movie Jurassic Park, Ian Malcolm complains to the park's creator, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think whether they should." We don't need to rush into a world of three-parent embryos. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is Weekend Edition, and we certainly do welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos and Kassie Dulin. And, you know, it's interesting, when Billy said the kind of black Holocaust, the first thought that went through my mind was the issue of abortion, because you've heard many times, whether it's been Alveda King or Stephen Broden or many others, they've talked about that. My commentary in December was just a reminder that one of the greatest challenges I think the African American culture is facing right now is every single year, every single day, let's just bring it down to that, every single day, 1,500 black Americans are aborted. Mm-hmm. There are more African Americans aborted by that race than anything else. You go back to the history of Margaret Sanger, that's exactly what she wanted to do. And in the last 20 years, the share of all abortions in white women has decreased, but the share of black women's has increased. And even though African Americans constitute about 13% of the population, it means if you do the math, and I'll save you all the mathematics there, 5 times as many black babies are aborted as white babies. But it isn't just that. Because of those abortions, there's a study that came out of Canada saying the high abortion rate among black women is probably the cause for a disproportionately high percentage of subsequent premature births among blacks, and all sorts of other issues. The rate is 3 to 4 times as high for black women as for other ethnic groups. So that's the black Holocaust. Now, I think what he meant was slavery. And if you would like to read about that, I did a whole week of radio programs. You go to probe.org, Slavery in America. And I think it's really important to recognize that, yes, this is one of the darkest chapters in American history. Now, the question I always like to bring up is, how did we eventually overturn slavery, first in England and then in the United States? And to a person, almost everybody in the abolition movement was a Christian. Now, were there Christians that justified slavery? Sure, I certainly acknowledge that as well. But when you look at William Wilberforce, whether you look at John Wesley, you look at Charles Wesley, you look at all the abolitionists, the Clapham group in England, they were all Christians. To a person, was the abolitionist movement in America primarily Christian? Of course it was. As a matter of fact, the greatest push for the abolitionist movement came from the Second Great Awakening. And so, again, I think you have to recognize those are the cases. And certainly we have some really sad things in American history since then, because you mentioned one. You can go and look at how you had the voluntary sterilization at the Tuskegee Institute. Where did that come from? Well, that didn't come from Christians. I mean, that came, interestingly enough, from, I just mentioned Margaret Sanger. It came from the people pushing euthanasia, came from the idea that we really need to reduce those people that are unfit for society. It came from a very secular, neo-Darwinian, survival of the fittest kind of mindset. So, let's be clear about where some of those evils came from, and I'll be the first to own up to those, because I don't want to be on my high horse, of course. But at the same time, let's also recognize that all the great good that Christianity and Christian values have given to our society today.
I'm actually grateful that there's more commentary about the beginnings, as you alluded to, of Planned Parenthood. It didn't have a novel women's health care, reproductive freedom motive. It was very, very dark and very anti-minority. And I also like that there's more attention being paid to Planned Parenthood locates their facilities around America in largely minority neighborhoods and majority minority neighborhoods. And there's just, I'm certainly not going to speak to every single person who works for Planned Parenthood, but it's a cynical and dark thing that the way they place their facilities makes abortion more readily available to minority women. And I just, in fact, some of the most eloquent and articulate people speaking out about this are black pastors and black American, like Dr. Alveda King, and there's a local politician here in North Texas, Pastor Stephen Broden, pointing out that this is a modern day Holocaust. And people say, well, but the women want to get abortions, and that's, so you're not really forcing them. They want it. But I think there's a cultural acceptance of devaluing of the value of unborn children in the minority community that should be vigorously fought against.
I think we also need to remind ourselves, this was mainstream for a while. I mean, you had a prominent Supreme Court justice who said that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And so this was the real push for euthanasia and for any kind of removal of the unfit from our society. And if it weren't for all the revelations from the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, that probably would have taken off in ways that we are fortunate that it did not take off. And you go back and look at the early part of the 20th century, those ideas were very disruptive. And again, I didn't expect to go in that direction, but Billy kind of raised a very important issue that needs to be addressed and is part of our history. It's a sad chapter of American history, but let's again recognize where some of those ideas came from.
And what I love so much about what you were saying about how Christians have been such a force in changing the face of helping people realize how abortion hurts lives, especially Black lives, is that they were effective. Back when Roe v. Wade was passed, so many people thought, well, this is the end of the abortion debate. The law has been changed. There's nothing we can do about it. But committed Christians and people of faith got together and said, okay, we're gonna take a stand on this. And they were patient, they were strategic, and they were effective, because my generation, I'm a millennial, and my generation is now more pro-life than the generation that came before us. And that's what so encourages me about a lot of the issues that we face today. It can be very discouraging to be a person of faith and to feel like we're losing on some of the issues we care about, like freedom of speech and religious liberty. But when I look at what happened with abortion, I think, no, I believe the tide can change if people of faith are willing to take a stand and continue to fight and not give up. And the beautiful thing is we have truth on our side.
Do you have a testimony in that regard? Because I remember seeing a Twitter post that you posted a while back about that.
Sure. I have always grown up in a home with faith, and I loved America, but I just didn't know how to get involved. And I thought that the way you stood for truth was within the church. But as I got a little older, I began to see what was happening and how my values were under attack. And I became involved with a wonderful organization that teaches young Christians to take a stand for their values. And it was just eye-opening to me to realize, wow, the people who are making a difference, a lot of them are Christians who are in our government, especially in Texas here. I got to meet them and see, wow, if I care about these values, I have to do something. And so that kind of started my journey, and I've been really honored to do that since.
You were the governor of Patriot Academy. Right?
I was.
Yes, I
was.
that.
That's right.
Yeah, so again, they do what's called a Patriot Academy. We might explain that for just a minute. We've talked about that with Rick Green, but that was an opportunity for you to go to the legislature and run for office and pass bills. Now, they didn't actually get implemented, but it was such a great opportunity. And again, we want to give high praise to Rick Green and all the people that put together the Patriot Academy. And you were the governor.
I was. Yep. So it was when I'd just gotten out of college. It's a program for students ages 16 to 25. And they encourage students to come and learn how to lead and how to stand for their values. And so I went to the Texas Capitol terrified because I was walking in. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I had no political experience whatsoever before I stepped in. But I got to be there with Rick Green and some other amazing leaders. And some of them, what I realized, the biggest revelation I had is these are just people who are just like me, who care about these issues, but they're making a difference. I met moms who were there with their kids in strollers who were fighting for the right to educate their kids according to their values, and people who were standing up for the right to have the 10 Commandments. And I realized if they can do it, there's no excuse for me not to do it if I want that protected. And it led me on an amazing journey. In just a few weeks, I found myself going from no political experience whatsoever to so fired up that I moved to Iowa and joined Governor Mike Huckabee's campaign for president and was with him through his entire journey. And it was amazing. And it really redirected my life and helping me to realize how we have so many blessings here in America. I love our nation because of how we have the right to worship God and live our life in accordance with our values. And we take that so for granted, but it's a right that we have, but it is not guaranteed. And it was eye-opening to me to realize, oh, okay, things are happening against that, but I can do something about it. And starting small, but going to hopefully being able to make a greater impact.
What was the group? I'm sorry, what was Rick Green's group's name?
It's called Patriot Academy, and it's held at the Texas Capitol every summer. So I encourage you to go to patriotacademy.com to check it out.
Isn't that fun?
It's very fun.
And again, going from there to the Huckabee campaign to now, of course, the Director of Legal Communications at Liberty Institute. And that can be your testimony, too. So some of you young people listening right now, get involved, because it is true, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life, but it's also true, the younger you are, the less likely you are to get involved politically in terms of voter registration and the rest. And certainly we need to hear from you as well. And one of the things we are trying to do is reach out to the next generation, your generation. And so that's one of the things we've done so often. That's why we have those videos in the Uncensored series. It's also why, as we go to the break, you'll hear us talk once again about taking action. We need to support the nation of Israel. We will do so, and this particular call kind of postponed our conversation, so we'll have that when we come back on the issue of immigration. All that coming up right after this.
America needs true friends in the Middle East, and for decades, Israel has been a solitary smile in a dust storm of scowls and terrorism. In early March, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is coming to America, but the president refuses to meet with him, and many members of Congress now say they won't attend his speech at the Capitol. Is this how we treat a friend? Is that what you expect from your leaders? Point of View developed its Take Action system for issues like this to help make your voice heard by elected officials. Visit pointofview.net right now and click on the gray Take Action button near the top of the screen. That's the gray button, Take Action. We've also got it in the middle of the front page under the pictures of today's guests. Take action now at pointofview.net. 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 Tell your representative and your 2 senators you expect them to attend the speech and to support Israel. Point of View Radio. One more way we're helping you stand for truth. Pointofview.net. Take action. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We have Debbie Georgatos and Kassie Dulin with us today, and we're going to get into the issue of immigration for just a minute. Let me set the scene, and that is that this week, as you well know, Debbie, we were supposed to, according to the dictate of the executive amnesty provided by President Obama, to begin to decide not to deport up to 5 million. The number that is used in the court ruling is 4.3 million. We'll say 4 or 5 million, whatever you want. And Judge Andrew Hannon ruled that the Department of Homeland Security was not given that kind of discretion by the law to give 4.3 million removable aliens legal presence. He said, in quote, "In fact, the law mandates that these illegally present individuals be removed. The Department of Homeland Security has adopted a new rule that substantially changes both the status and employability of millions. These charges go beyond mere enforcement or even non-enforcement of the nation's immigration scheme." So where we are at this point in time is that the U.S. District Court has issued what is called a temporary injunction. It didn't overturn it, but it actually looked at a couple of other issues, because one of the issues, as I think we've talked about before, Debbie, has been separation of powers. Can the executive branch make law? I thought it was kind of interesting. Judge Hannon addresses that, but he really says the big issue is that you did not allow public opinions and public comment. And so as a result, he kind of dealt with that. But of course, the other one was one that, as we've heard before, on 22 separate occasions, and I think we even posted it here on the website, President Obama said he did not have the authority to take the authority he took. So there's really kind of two issues, public comment and authority. How do you come down on some of the issues that are actually now kind of swirling around the government right now?
They are swirling. And actually, I want to give credit to Governor Abbott, or the former Texas governor, Governor Perry and Lieutenant Governor Abbott, that this lawsuit came around because 26 or 27 states filed lawsuit to challenge the executive amnesty that President Obama just issued. And you're right, Kerby. The argument is, and this is interesting, I want to say as a lawyer by background, there's just a standard rule in jurisprudence that a judge does not reach a constitutional question unless he has to. If he can resolve a case, he or she can resolve a case without reaching a question of constitutionality, that's what he should do. So just the fact that he made this ruling on the subject of whether or not the Administrative Procedures Act was followed does not mean that he disregarded or did not buy into the whole larger question of whether or not this was executive amnesty was constitutional. But basically, because Americans elect a Congress, a senator and a House member, and they pass laws. And the administration, the executive branch, is supposed to enforce the laws. That's what agencies do. And a way to keep agencies from going wild in making regulations that are just beyond the scope of the law or are just onerous or in some way harmful, the federal law called the Administrative Procedures Act says that if you're going to put a big regulation out, you have to have a notice period, a comment period. It's published in the Federal Register, and so Americans around the country can say, hey, I can't believe you're going to do that, and they can write in comments. Right. Well, that's his first point is, nobody had any say in this. No one in the whole country had any say. This was just, I don't even think President Obama called this particular one an executive order. He just called it a memorandum, or he had some other word.
Non-enforcement, yeah.
But it was really, so it's in a way a brilliant ruling, because the judge is saying, this is just the first step. You had to give notice and public comment period time, which is really great. And especially, as you say, Kerby, President Obama has acknowledged on many occasions he had no authority to do what he did. The other great thing that came out of this was the ruling on standing, because a lot of the problem in challenging much of President Obama's executive orders, unconstitutional, wildly inappropriate executive orders, is when they have been challenged, courts will find the people challenging it don't have standing. It's just a legal document. It's like legal. Who do you have the right to be the one to complain?
You haven't been fined. It hasn't cost you anything. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So you have no complaint. But this particular law does cost the states a lot, and so the court found, thankfully, that there was standing. So now it's going to go up on appeal. I'm understanding that the administration is trying. They can't forum shop. They've got to go up to the circuit, but they can, or sixth circuit. I lost track. Fifth or sixth, whatever one.
Fifth on this one.
But they're trying to find the right judges panel.
They're trying to find the three
that they want.
But then they could go to en banc, which would be all of them.
Yeah,
the circuit.
but they're
Go ahead.
trying to get in front of the right judges, so perhaps the judges will go their way. But so there are bases upon which the appellate court could say, oh, they didn't have standing after all, or this doesn't fall under Administrative Procedures Act. But if you're going to be the president and trying to essentially change federal law, I think the concept of the Administrative Procedures Act is exactly what should apply.
Yes. Again, Kassie, you're not a lawyer. I'm not either. I don't play one on television either. So, but at the same time, I can see that when the president 22 different times says, I don't have the authority to do this, and then he does it, you don't have to know a whole lot about law to recognize there's got to be a problem there.
Definitely. I think that it's kind of a pretty clear violation of the rule of law and including the Constitution. And what encourages me is I see a lot of my friends who are younger than me and in my age range, and they're going back to the Constitution, and they're saying this is something that's really important. They recognize there is something different and there is something special about America. And a part of that is how we are a nation of laws. We are a nation that believes in the division of power, and that's a protection of freedom. And it's been very effective in preserving freedom. And when actions like this happen, it is very much a strong signal that freedom is being threatened and the rule of law. And that's very concerning.
I love that you talked about turning back the Constitution. That has been one of the most remarkable things in America over the last 6 years is people are turning back and reading the Constitution, and even prior to that, the Declaration of Independence, and getting a fresh look at what America is and how important all those guarantees are and how all those precious ideas from the Declaration and the Constitution, they made what America is. And so if you surrender them, including can the president become a dictator? Can he just issue new edicts and everybody just surrenders? America would change if that happened. And it could change either way, whether it was a conservative president or a Republican president or a Democrat president. If they get to make laws, they're circumventing not just Congress, but the whole American public whose right it is to choose our lawmakers.
One of the things that I'm noticing is a trend is there are now 2 states that actually have passed into law the requirement that if you're going to graduate from high school, you have to pass the citizenship test. And there's almost a dozen other states right now in their legislatures that are looking at that. And if you think about this, Debbie and Kassie, we are in a situation right now that sometimes the newly naturalized citizens know more about our history and government than the people that were born here. And Cassie's not an example, but some of her peers are, where they could not even tell you what the 3 branches of government are. They could not answer one of the questions in the citizenship test is, what would you call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution? These are kind of basic things. And if you think that's not a problem, how about the debate on CNN the other day between Chris Cuomo and the Supreme Court Justice, Ray Moore, in which at one point Chris Cuomo says, our rights are not God-given, they're given by law. Well, I'm thinking maybe he needs to take the citizenship test as well. As a matter of fact, David Barton, one of his commentaries, even pointed out the fact that, it's not that Chris Cuomo is the son of a very famous politician. It's not that he graduated from Yale. After all, Yale's not always so bad, is it? But most importantly, it's that he's 44 years of age, and like so many people of that generation, and since then, they never really learned the history of America. Maybe they need to go to Patriot Academy. What do you think?
I think that'd be a fantastic idea.
Real quick point along these lines was there was a comment by President Obama long before he ran for president. I think it was when he was running for Senate in Illinois or maybe for U.S. Senate. He talked about the Constitution, how much he didn't like it. And he talked about it as a charter of negative liberties. He basically said he didn't like the Constitution restricting how much the federal government can do. Not just, the Constitution is designed to protect the person, the people from the government. And he wanted to give more authority for the government to do to and for the people what he wanted the government to be able to do. It's actually a big window in his way he thinks about America.
Certainly. And again, there was a very good reason for that. As we've pointed out in this program before, one of the architects, perhaps the architect of the Constitution, was a man by the name of James Madison. And he studied under John Witherspoon. You say, well, who was he? Well, he was the president of what today is Princeton University. And I've given quotes before about how he learned about the idea of a Calvinist view and about human sinfulness. And he recognized that and as he says in Federalist Paper 10 and Federalist Paper number 51, that ambition needs to bump up against ambition. He was trying to find a way ultimately to control sinful behavior. So if you start with the assumption that we're created in the image of God and have value and dignity, but you also start with the assumption that we have sin and ambition and greed and selfishness, you have to figure out a way to have those negative prohibitions. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a king. And the founders of this country, and especially the framers of our government, they'd already lived under a king, and they didn't want to have another one. So, if nothing else, that's a little bit of history. We'll come back and make some other comments, because after all, next Thursday, funding for Homeland Security runs out. And will that mean that they will or will not fund the amnesty executive order or non-executive order by the president? So we'll talk about that with our roundtable, and we'll do that right after these messages.
Valentine's Day brings thoughts of love and marriage and sweet things to eat. This Valentine's Day, a business that is all about those things got some very bad news. Aaron and Melissa Klein own Sweet Cakes Bakery. Well, at least they had a bakery. It was located on the edge of downtown Gresham, Oregon. They specialize in wedding cakes. Well, at least they did, until the gay marriage Gestapo came after them. The backstory is that Melissa Klein bakes absolutely stunning cakes. She's still baking to order out of the couple's home, where their 5 young children also reside. She loved baking wedding cakes, though. She'd get to know each couple and would use her God-given creativity to fashion a cake that, according to Melissa, reflected them as a couple. She tells people if the couple chose her to provide their cake, I would just feel so honored to be able to be a part of such an amazing, special day. The Kleins are godly Christians who consider themselves called to make this unique contribution to celebrations of the God-ordained institution of marriage. The Kleins' problems began when 2 lesbians came into Sweet Cakes Bakery to order a wedding cake. At the time, same-sex marriage wasn't even legal in Oregon. Having ordered other cakes at the bakery, these young women were satisfied customers. This time, though, the Kleins declined the business, saying baking a cake for a same-sex wedding would violate their religious conviction that marriage is solely the union between one man and one woman. 7 months later, and surely they had found a cake vendor by then, the lesbian couple complained to the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. About a year ago, the Bureau brought charges against the Kleins for violating an Oregon civil rights law that includes sexual orientation as a protected category. This month, the couple was informed that they are guilty of violating that ordinance. Their penalty will be monetary. In March, they'll find out how much, but authorities predict at least $150,000, which the Kleins say will bankrupt them. It's been 2 years since the lesbian couple first walked into Sweet Cakes by Melissa. The women are still upset by the statement Aaron Klein made in defense of his own freedom in this matter. He said, I'm free to exercise my religion however I see fit. If I'm told to make a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage, I feel that I'm violating my beliefs. I don't think I should have to do that. At the March hearing, the lesbians will be awarded damages for that. Sweet Cakes Bakery is now closed. Gay activists threatened to launch boycotts against any wedding vendor that did business with the Kleins, so the referral network went away. That was the death blow to their retail shop. Under these new civil rights laws, there's one group that's not protected: Christians. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for just a few more minutes today. It is our weekend edition. Debbie Georgatos and Kassie Dulin with us, and we'll have some final comments in just a minute. But there are 2 very important things that are going to happen next Thursday. And I'll put those on the table, and you can comment on either or both of those. And the first is that the funding runs out for the Department of Homeland Security. For listeners that are not familiar, the decision was made by the Republican leadership, both in the House and the Senate, to fund all of the government until September, which is when their fiscal year ends, except Homeland Security, so that they could pull out the part of amnesty. So Thursday, February 26th, there is a piece that we've posted here about funding Homeland Security but blocking amnesty. A second one we might get to in just a minute is also on Thursday, is when the FCC is going to vote without any public comment, again, on what is called net neutrality. And again, most people's eyes roll over, well, what's net neutrality? Penna Dexter did a very good piece this week on that, but some people have referred to it as Obamacare for the Internet, or, that you will eventually have the federal government of the Internet. And one of the people really speaking out against this, and I wanted to have him on the program, Anjet Pai, who's one of the FCC commissioners. I think the good summary of this is that the FCC is adopting a solution that won't work to a problem that doesn't exist using legal authority we don't have. Well, that's clear enough. I don't, other than
He's
that.
been outspoken.
Yeah, he really has been. But what about Homeland Security? The government really does not shut down in this case, because all of the various functions of government except Homeland Security are funded. But between now and Thursday, spending authority runs out. What about this?
There's actually a piece I am assuming you might have linked on the website that is from National Review about funding Homeland Security but block amnesty. I just want to say this one little point I think is among the most important to keep in mind about this. Even if we have a shutdown, that's the big fear on the conservative side, is if we don't get a budget, if we have even a minor shutdown of the government over DHS, that Republicans lose the argument, and that also that there's going to be a major damage or alarm, or we're going to put Americans at risk. And so I actually have a great thing that came from the Congressional Research Service. And here's a short story why this matters much less than people think. I mean, the proposal in this National Review thing is saying essentially pass everything else that we don't have a dispute about, fund it, and do a separate bill that just, fails to fund most of it, or fails a little bit of it, funds a little bit of it. But federal law already provides, even in the case of a shutdown, even if we don't have any money going into DHS, that all essential people still come to work and get paid.
Of course.
In Customs and Border Protection, it is 88% of the department will still come to work even with a shutdown. In Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, 80%. Literally, Coast Guard, the numbers go on and on, but every essential security service. So it's a false alarm, this idea that if we can't get this solved right now, that we're going to lose security. I mean, obviously all the air traffic controllers come to work. This is not a crisis. And Americans, I think, urged this last election cycle, they want Congress and the conservatives to stand up against this illegal amnesty and basically stand up against a lawless president, like we were talking about the last section, a president who doesn't follow the Constitution. Republicans have this ability right now, and they ought to just stand strong. Fund what we're going to fund. Make a separate law if you want to. This is a fine idea this guy had. But don't fund the things that now this court has even said have not constitutional problems, but legal problems. And stand strong. I think that we so fear a shutdown that we fear if we don't do exactly what Obama says, we'll lose out. And that is just not true. The people will be with us.
Ann Coulter did a piece on how you can to read the election, what the election was, and she used all sorts of examples of people that were pro-amnesty, even in the Republican Party, one that was actually the House Minority Leader, and all of these individuals that lost their elections because of that. So that's the first point. But back to the second one, and I just want to alert our listeners, because this week you're going to hear the drumbeat. Oh, this is going to make us less secure. It's going to make us more vulnerable. And they're going to kind of create this image that come Wednesday at midnight, all the border secure agents on the Texas Mexican border, on the Arizona Mexican border, on the California Mexican border, on the border with Canada, and on and on and on, are all of a sudden going to go, well, that's it, and just walk on home and not actually be on the border. That is not the case. And I think you've pointed out that, again, this is a situation that was created in large part because there was a feel that this was an unconstitutional exertion of authority by the executive branch. The Republicans have been leading it, but there's at least 6 Senate Democrats who have opposed some of the policies. But if they have sort of a gun put to their head, they might vote along party lines. So we'll see where this goes. But that's one of the crises that we're going to be facing this week, the issue of immigration. And the other one I just thought I'd mention in passing is we haven't said a whole lot about it, although I think this week Penna Dexter did a really good job when she was sitting in this chair here, talking about this idea of net neutrality and the fact that this administration really is convinced that we need to actually have the government take control. And again, let me come to you, Debbie, for just a minute. As a lawyer, they're using a particular piece of legislation that was passed to deal with radio and then a little bit later television the internet is not the same. And let's recognize the reason the internet is free and unfettered is in large part due to a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, a Republican president, George W. Bush, that have said, let's just let this go and let's do what we can occasionally to give some direction. But all of a sudden, you're going to have a level of governmental control that I just don't think anybody really wants to actually deal with, number one. And I'll give you the numbers in just a minute, what it will cost for you in terms of increased service fees for the internet.
Exactly. It's really many issues raised, but among the most important once, if this were to be passed the way it is, to be adopted, there's all sorts of hidden fees and taxes for small businesses, for purchasers of items online. It just opens up the entire internet to a majority regulation by the federal government. But even worse and far more important, I actually looked up, and I don't have it with me today, but a list of the top 10 countries that control the internet and how and are bad about it. We don't want to be like any of those 10 countries.
No, we don't.
There's just idea that
Myanmar and China and North Korea.
Burma.
No, Burma. Yeah, that's right. You just do not want that.
My quick point just is, on the subject of the internet, it is the most robust source of information, knowledge, advocacy, and if anyone out there does trust the federal government and think that they will take charge of it and not interfere with the people expressing, and they're not interfere with people's rights or freedom of religion, freedom of expression. I don't know what you've been thinking about lately, but just look what they did when they had authority with the IRS to hassle political opponents. Letting the government take charge of the internet is surrendering your freedom. It should be vigorously fought.
Well, very good. The estimates are it would increase new taxes on the internet by $11 billion. So we'll have fun with that. Just before we go, first of all, Kassie, thank you for joining us again. Let's talk about Liberty Institute. As you go to the website, they can read some of the stories you've been talking about today, right?
Yes, you can go to libertyinstitute.org and read about some really amazing cases that we've had. Recently, we have a 90% win rate when we take cases, and religious liberty is being defended. So if you want to hear about people of all faiths and what they are going through, but how they're being defended and their rights are free, then you can just go to libertyinstitute.org and read this.
Just look for your picture there. Click on website. If they look for Debbie's picture, it will take them to ladiescanwetalk.org. You have a talk show coming up Sunday, and I think you'll be talking about a few of these things we've been talking about.
This is kind of my show prep, doing this on Friday. I didn't like that joke about Rush Limbaugh, but actually it's so helpful. But yes, it's on 6:60 a.m. from 6 to 8 p.m. called Ladies Can We Talk, and I have ladiescanwetalk.org.
And I would say that many of you are not in an area where you can hear it, but you can go online and you have a chance to hear it as well. So
you certainly can. 6:60 a.m. and click on listen, and it'll come right up.
Just always thrilling to have two real smart women across from me giving us lots of great insight. And so we are going to say goodbye for the day. Over the weekend, have a good time, but we're back on Monday with all sorts of very important issues, including we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about how we can pray for the Supreme Court and this upcoming decision on marriage. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here on Monday.
Thank you.
Each one of us has so much to be thankful for. And here at Point of View, we're thankful that we can serve and support you.
I don't think I could do what I do without Point of View on a daily basis.
I just can't even begin to tell you how much that this ministry has meant to me, especially now being a father, the values and things that I hear on Point of View and how you shaped my worldview and made me passionate.
Point of View is a very unique ministry and gives us a Christian perspective.
Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
I can't see a better way to invest in our future than to support Point of View.
We are so very thankful for you. Can we count you as a thankful listener? Please show your gratitude. Give $30 a month or give $100. Give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Call 800-227-1444 or mail to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.